Right now, there are people in the defense and intelligence community who believe that you and me can't handle the full truth around disclosure. They believe that it is so explosive, so earth-shattering, that it must be served piece by piece in courses.
There's a lot of people who are impatient for information, and rightfully so. I get it. We're human beings. We want our information. We want it now, and why are you holding back? But sometimes you have to let the right people in the right positions digest information, right? Sometimes you can't expect a 10-course meal to be digested all in one bite. It just can't happen.
Whatever you think about Lou Elizondo, his analogy of the 10-course meal is really useful. I think we can all agree on what the first few courses have been. There's something in our skies and we don't know what it is. It's advanced technology, far beyond anything that we've created. In fact, we're certain it's not part of our inventory. We're also certain it's not Russia or China. It's just a genuine unknown. The next thing we hear is that these craft have occasionally crashed and that we've recovered some of those craft. Indeed, we've actually recovered the biologics, whatever that means. And recently, there have been more and more hints being dropped that our Western governments have some kind of agreement and relationship with these intelligences. So here's the question. What are the final few dishes that we're waiting to be served? What are the ideas that are so dangerous and so explosive that they can't be revealed until some context has been given? Well, today we're going to be talking about one of the dishes that we can certainly expect to be served up to us in the coming years. And that is the topic of human-alien hybrids. I must confess that for me, this topic has always just been one of many different fascinations waiting to be explored in my notebook. But having spent some time really researching this topic, I've come to the conclusion that it is one of the central pieces required to understand what's going on around us. As we proceed together today, you will see how this critical jigsaw piece in the modern disclosure movement causes concern, how it challenges our very sense of our human identity, and how it could create a philosophical backdrop that could be used to justify atrocities and apocalyptic conflicts. Our human population may be being primed for a revelation about human-alien hybrids. And when it comes, it will be explosive. The first question that should be on our mind as we embark on this topic is how we can know that human-alien hybrids is the next dish in our disclosure dinner. And we know this from a few different sources. Firstly, there's John Ramirez.
That's the word that Louis Elizondo can't say, that everyone in the Pentagon is expecting him to say someday, is that we're all hybrids. Things are happening on it's not a disclosure, it's a scheduled dissemination. And so certain things have to be set up before other things can be revealed.
Ramirez was a GS-15, which is extremely senior in the defense and intelligence community and had held senior roles across multiple different DoD bodies and agencies. And his take was, when this interview was filmed a couple of years ago, that the topic of human-alien hybrids was off the menu for the meantime. But it's not just John Ramirez. When Tom DeLonge was speaking with 2, 3, and 4-star generals back in 2016, he brought up the topic of human-alien hybrids. This is what he says.
Everything in those early advisory group communications were fine, but when I touched on the idea of hybrids in the human soul is when all the communication stopped on that thread. So I have to look at that as something that I shouldn't have been going into at the time.
Now that's two different sources indicating that the conversation of hybrids is something that has to be delayed until other conversations have been had. But we have one more source who can double down on this as well. Here are the diaries of Jacques Vallée. Diana Pasulka was in San Francisco today. We were finally able to get into the more esoteric aspects of her book, which we hadn't dared discuss over the internet. This hints at levels beyond the usual patchwork of theological beliefs that feed people's aspiration for a higher world. Yet there's a darker side to her book. In a similar vein of absurdity, they didn't want her to mention hybrid creatures. Ramirez, DeLonge, and Pasulka have one thing in common. They have contacts with the people in the innermost sanctums of the defense and intelligence community, And all of them have had a consistent message. Disclosure is ordered. Disclosure is being served up in multiple courses. And the one course you are not allowed to preempt is a discussion about human-alien hybrids. And by now you must be crying out, asking, why? Why is this conversation so sensitive? Well, let's break it down together. Ask yourself, how could humans and non-humans breed? The only way that's possible is if they both share enough common genetic material. That has huge implications. If humans and non-humans are breeding, it means that non-human intelligence isn't just some far-off civilization that we're meeting for the first time. This is the story of a relative, of someone or something that is connected to us, and we are connected to it because we share genetic material. If you go one step further, you can figure out what happens next. Did they create us? What does this mean about our religious institutions? What does this mean about our sense of human identity? What does this mean for how they perceive us? Are we children? Are we livestock? These are not small topics. And yet, even if you were somehow able to navigate those dialogues, there is another layer to this which is potentially dangerous. If non-humans have bred with human beings throughout our history, there is a possibility that different groups of human beings, different demographics, and different races may have more or less non-human genetic material, meaning that it could be argued, potentially legitimately, that there is a genetic hierarchy on the planet. Now that should be ringing alarm bells. Immediately we've gone from a fascination about the possibility of a human-alien hybrid to a conversation about which races have a closest relationship to them in terms of genetics and what that might mean. You do not have to be a genius to see where this could go, because it wouldn't be the first time in human history that people have begun to believe that some races are objectively superior to others. When you look at the history of human suffering and conflict, tribalism is a consistent theme. The inability to see someone else with different politics, with a different religion, or potentially of a different racial or genetic profile to you as being your equal has been a consistent theme throughout our human history. Just look at European colonialism, this conviction that one race was superior to others, the same belief that enabled the slave trade, the apartheid regime in South Africa, and even genocides. That's just a short snapshot of our modern history, and it seems that again and again, human beings have somehow found themselves in a situation where their belief that some races and some genetics are superior has enabled them to commit the most awful atrocities imaginable. Even in our best moments, like take for example the discovery of evolution and natural selection, a huge step forward for science. Even then, human beings found a way to twist this and to use it to justify racial superiority. In the late 1800s, following Charles Darwin's remarkable discoveries, eugenics was created. The idea that we wouldn't just wait for natural selection, but we would proactively select superior genes and put restrictions on those who were believed to be genetically inferior. For example, by restricting marriages to those people, and even by sterilizing them. Simultaneously, at almost exactly the same time as eugenics was arising, Helena Blavatsky would claim to have had contact with hidden intelligences who had revealed to her a secret teaching about root races. Mankind is obviously divided into God-informed men and lower human creatures. The intellectual difference between Aryan and other civilized nations and such savages as the South Sea Islanders is inexplicable on any other grounds. No amount of culture, no generations of training amid civilization could raise such human specimens as the Bushmen, the Vedas of Ceylon, and some African tribes to the same intellectual level as the Aryans. The sacred spark is missing in them, and it is they who are the only inferior races on the globe. Between Blavatsky's ideas on the spiritual side and eugenics on the scientific, a fertile ground was created for the Nazis to come to power in the 1900s. And when they did, we all know exactly what happened. One of the worst atrocities in human history, which was enabled and written on a conviction that there was genuine human differentiation between the superior Aryan race and all of those who were holding humanity back. Following World War II and the understanding of what had happened in the Holocaust, eugenics and race theory, understandably, were no longer in vogue. Instead, we saw movements towards a more unified vision of the planet, the establishment of the United Nations, the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, decolonization, the slow waning of monarchies, groups of people who believed that they were genetically superior based on their blood and lineage, the civil rights movement, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall, pushing people into the 1990s with a lingering sense that maybe the world was going to be united in a way that it had never been united before. And it was with this intellectual, philosophical, and global context that we got these comments from President Ronald Reagan.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
This notion that Reagan shared isn't just an isolated thought of his own. Bill Clinton has said the same thing on a late-night chat show with Jimmy Kimmel.
Maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened.
The argument is pretty straightforward. If something truly different comes towards our planet and we're forced to acknowledge the reality of non-human intelligence, if a disclosure moment happens, perhaps it will unify the planet by forcing us to realize that in the context of some other, in the context of something else which truly seems fundamentally different to us as a species, we might look at each other and realize we're all one. We're all together. We can finally see our similarities with the context of something truly different. It's a beautiful idea. And I wonder if you, like me, when I first got into this movement, it was one of the motivations I had for looking into the UFO phenomenon. I thought to myself, this is noble. I can push for something which could potentially be a unifier of the planet. And I still hope and believe that. But what if disclosure wasn't unifying? What if we discovered things about ourselves that could potentially be divisive? Like the idea that human beings have non-human DNA and that some people have more and some people have less. Is it possible that even if this was true, it might be considered explosive and dangerous in our modern context? Look around you. Look at the conflicts that are happening right now on our planet. On what lines are they drawn? Is it political? Is it religious? I'm sure you can make an argument that it's those things. But you'd be a fool not to recognize that many of them are also built on a foundation of racial differences. Could this world, the world that you and I live in, really handle such a revelation? Now, before you answer that question, let's just acknowledge something here. Right now, this is relatively theoretical. We're just throwing ideas around and projecting ideas into the future. So maybe it's time to get a little bit more specific. Maybe we should go and gather the breadcrumbs which have been left all over the disclosure floor to see if we can piece a picture together of what our governments believe about human alien hybrids.
Oh, absolutely. I do believe that genetics and biology play a major role in all of this in so many ways, and just trust me on that.
In 2007, a man called Chris Bledsoe, living in North Carolina, had some remarkable experiences. And as soon as he reported them, he found himself inundated with mysterious people from the defense and intelligence community, not just in his own country, but from people all around the world. They wanted to understand what it is that had happened to him. We know something remarkable must have happened to Chris Bledsoe and his family because of the caliber of people who ended up connecting themselves to him. The likes of Timothy Taylor, Hal Povermeyer, and even Jim Semivan. And it's Jim Semivan who held an extraordinarily senior post in the CIA who I want to focus on. Here is Ryan Bledsoe, Chris Bledsoe's son.
As it was explained to me by a man named Jim Semivan, who is a CIA program director who ran the clandestine operations for the CIA, meaning he literally directed the spy program. I was asking Jim all these questions. I was only like 21 or 22 at the time, and I was just asking him all these crazy questions. Why are you guys investigating us? What, why do you think this is happening to us? And, he and his wife are like, well, we think you're hybrids. And I'm like, yeah, okay, Jim, come on. Next question. Like, just asking all these questions, right? They were telling us, like, study your bloodline, study your genetics.
Why was it that the Bledsoes had their remarkable experience? Jim Semivan suggests that it could have something to do with the genetics of the family and the possibility that they have non-human DNA, meaning that they are literally hybrids. You see how startling this is? The idea that some human beings on Earth could literally be described as hybrids because of their genetic material, and that this could be a critical and defining factor in who has encounters with non-human intelligences. Now you might be thinking, look, this is just what some CIA guy said at a barbecue. And I wouldn't begrudge you for thinking that. But I also want to point you towards Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. And once again, it doesn't matter what you think about Lou Elizondo. The most important thing here is to see what the message is that's being trickled out of the Pentagon. Here is Lou Elizondo writing about his work with Dr. Gary Nolan. If psychic ability exists, Nolan theorized, it would have to be connected in some way to the codate putamen. The way he saw it, the codate putamen was the hardware that allowed these brains to perform their work. DNA was the blueprint for the hardware. The arguments for genetic causation were not far-fetched. A Scottish psychologist had traced a gift of premonition through family trees in her own home county. In Scotland, it was common for a child to inherit his or her father's gift for second sight. Most interesting to me was Will and Gary's discovery of the connection to indigenous people of North America. It turned out that almost all the people in Will's studies, military and intelligence officials with remote viewing abilities and/or UAP encounters and biological effects, had Native American DNA, specifically Cherokee blood. Even more interesting, socializing this revelation led to also discovering that almost everyone who was involved with ATIP had this background as well. I did, Jay did, Hal did, John Robert did, and others did as well. Even stranger, key players on Senate committees, people who were very active in this topic, turned out to have Cherokee blood. The implications of this are frankly enormous. It's not just that individuals who have unique blood or genetic material, or however you want to describe it, are more likely to have encounters with non-human intelligences. It's also that those individuals may be more likely to have psychic abilities, and also may be more likely to have a proclivity towards certain kinds of work, hence all those individuals participating in the disclosure movement. Now I want you to suspend any disbelief you currently have, just so we can go a step further and build this vision of what this genetic variation looks like. I want you to ask, when did this genetic inbreeding happen? If you are going to make the claim that some people have more or less non-human DNA, that also implies that breeding and the exchange of genetic materials has been happening. Wouldn't that make sense of a lot of alien abductions? Here's Jacques Vallée in his book, Dimensions. In other accounts, abductees of both sexes have described having intercourse with aliens. Many researchers speculate that such accounts prove that intruders from space are experimenting with human genetics. But they fail to point out that these modern stories are consistent with perplexing accounts that come to us from earlier times, from the oldest records we have. I wonder what you think of the abduction phenomenon. What could its purposes be? and whether you think that a genetic component might actually explain the furious work that's been going on. What if there is a large-scale program in place to slowly alter the genetic material of human beings, potentially for our betterment, or potentially to ensure that these non-humans continue to have access to certain types of genetic material? But probably what is most interesting about Vallée's quote here is his point that this intercourse and this genetic exchange isn't just something we see in the modern UFO phenomenon. It's also something that we see in historical encounters with non-human intelligences. Throughout Vallée's work, he documents and highlights the role of fairies, of angels, of demons, of all these different types of specters that linger with us in this world, whom some people have had encounters with throughout human history. And in the quote that we just read, Vallée highlights how intercourse and breeding and genetic exchange is a common theme throughout the modern UFO phenomenon, throughout the encounters that people claim to have had with fairies and elves, and even going back to succubi, incubi, angels, and demons. And if you keep going further and further back into history, what do you find in our earliest tales? Nearly every single mythology has stories of the gods breeding with human beings. Hercules and Perseus both had Zeus for a father with human mothers. Gilgamesh from Mesopotamian lore was believed to have been 2/3 god and 1/3 man. Then you've got the Pandava brothers from Hindu scripture, who were also hybrids between divine beings and human beings. And then, of course, you've got Genesis chapter 6 from the Pentateuch. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." Genesis 6 is one of the most mysterious passages from the entire Hebrew Bible. But in the context of a conversation about human-alien hybrids, it begins to glimmer in a new light. There is a tale here throughout all of our mythologies about a strange genetic event where gods from heaven came down and bred with human beings. And it led to these mighty beings, tall giants like Gilgamesh, mighty men of renown, the Nephilim, and heroes like Hercules and Perseus. Is it possible that somewhere in our distant past, humanity's DNA was forever altered by inbreeding between humans and non-humans? And is it possible that these rumors of psychic capabilities may in fact be the result of this DNA's lingering impact? Now, all of this just seems really far out. It's really hard to grapple with these ideas of ancient mythologies. You know, one day we're speaking about a CIA person that actually lives today and had actually said these things, and the next minute we're looking at a scripture which is from some part of our ancient history that we can't even have contact with. I understand why it might feel like these two conversations shouldn't go together. And yet, when Tom DeLonge made contact with 2, 3, and 4-star generals, what was it that they were pushing on him? It wasn't just genetics. It was also ancient mythology.
You start casually asking your advisors questions, sort of feeling your way along, not wanting to push it too far. But you ask some question and he gives you the answer. Instead of him telling you, yeah, we've got the flying saucers stashed at Area 51, or he tells you to take a look at Greek mythology.
Oh my gosh! You know, it was not only was it not what I was expecting to hear, it was told to me 3 different times from different people, and then I flew across the country and had a chance to meet somebody of the highest ranks in multiple places. And right when I sit down and I have a chance to bring this person on board, and he stops me and he goes, "When I was a kid, I used to read a lot of Greek mythology." And he just stares at me.
Now, I don't know why the likes of General Michael Hayden or General Mike Carey or General Neil McCaslin might have been wanting to push on Tom DeLonge specifically the idea of the Greek gods. But there are some things we can pull out which we can make sense of. Firstly, like almost any other Western ancient mythology, there is a flood story in the ancient Greek literature. In the Greek version, in the place of the biblical Noah or the Mesopotamian Atrahasis or Utnapishtim, there's the character of Deucalion. Deucalion is warned about the flood by Prometheus, one of the Titans, and ends up building a chest, which is essentially like an ark, which enables him and his wife to survive the flood. Interestingly as well, prior to the flood, just like in Genesis 6 and just like in the Atrahasis, the Mesopotamian mythology, there was a genetic monstrosity going on as well. Now, what I find especially interesting is how senior Air Force brass were encouraging DeLong to believe in the legend of Atlantis.
And in some of those stovepipes, they've come to the conclusion, this is what's so crazy, but I'm going to say it, that Atlantis was real. And something was very important about that time frame, and very important about who the humans were at that place.
Why would people from the Air Force and from the defense and intelligence community try and spread a story about how human beings might have been altered prior to a catastrophe in our ancient past? And does part of that story involve people surviving with this genetic mutation and living on here on the planet? Could this explain why some royal dynasties throughout human history have claimed a direct genetic relationship to the gods? Can this explain their obsession with blue blood and inbreeding to protect the line? Could this also explain the rise of ideas like Helena Blavatsky's conception of root races? Is it possible that people throughout human history have been trying to protect what they perceived to be an elevated lineage, which gives them access to non-human intelligences and psychic capabilities? This genetic conception by Blavatsky, which was later taken and mutated by the Nazis, seems like an idea that could never belong to our own defense and intelligence communities. I mean, there's like no way that the United States would ever get involved in any program which involved trying to create superior genetic material, right? And there's like no way that the United States government would ever have a program where they're using non-human genetic material to try and enhance human genetic material, because that would tie a line directly through all the different conversations that we've talked about. Well, I don't know whether you were paying attention during last year's UFO hearings, but here is Representative Lauren Boebert, and whatever you think about her, she's clearly heard something strange.
And this is for all four of you. Yes or no, please. I have many questions I want to get to. Are there any known instances of recovered materials or technologies that are not of human origin and maybe connected to any advanced bioscience defense programs within the USG?
I don't know.
I wouldn't be able to answer that, ma'am.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay, so there are rumors that have come up to the Hill of a secretive project within the Department of Defense involving the manipulation of human genetics with what is described as non-human genetic material, potentially for the enhancement of human capabilities, hybrids.
Now, I don't know who Representative Lauren Boebert is, but I do not think that she would ask a question like that in the context of a UFO hearing if she and other people around her hadn't heard some sort of rumors about such a program. I want you to imagine if it's true, that somewhere in a secret laboratory, they're trying to explore what happens when you use non-human genetic material on human beings. Are they trying to discover whether some of these latent psychic capabilities could be activated? Are they potentially trying to create some sort of genetically enhanced super soldier? I wonder if some of this could shine extra light on the comments of Vladimir Putin.
Mankind is currently facing many threats. Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man.
Значит, что человек приобретает возможность влезать в генетический код, созданный или природой, или люди с религиозными взглядами говорят Господом Богом. Вы понимаете, человечество может вступить, и, скорее всего, вступит в ближайшее время, в очень сложный и очень ответственный период своего развития и существования. И вот то, о чем я сейчас сказал, может быть страшнее ядерной бомбы.
Going back to the conversation we were having about Greek mythology, there's one theme that we didn't pull out. And that is that in ancient Greek mythology, just like in many other ancient mythologies, there are actually multiple factions of gods who do not like each other. Here is Hesiod's theogony. And the Olympian gods, lords of the dark clouds, arrayed themselves in opposition to the Titans in soul-destroying strife, both sides showing the work of their hands and might. An awful roar of dreadful strife arose. Mighty deeds were shown, and the battle inclined. The gods hurled their grievous shafts upon one another, and the voice of both armies came together in the ether as they cried aloud. For those of us who were brought up in the Judeo-Christian worldview, our conception of God is very often just that there is one disembodied being floating up in the sky. But in reality, almost all ancient mythologies, including ancient Israelite mythology, included multiple physical deities who were believed to have bodies like ours and were often at war with each other. We see this in Hesiod's theogony, as we just read, but also in the likes of the Mesopotamian mythologies and in the Mahabharata in Hindu mythology as well. The gods fight each other. They don't like each other.
I was told that there are numerous gods fighting amongst themselves and interjecting themselves into human affairs, that those myths are true. All those ancient stories, those are real.
There is not a single they here. Certainly multiple factions of the same species, if not multiple species. And all the complexity that brings, which might be our best hope.
Now, I know that I've been weaving around quite a few different conversations and topics here, so let me be super clear about what it is that I'm pushing towards. Ancient mythologies, like the ancient Greek mythology, include this conception of multiple factions of gods who fight each other and do not like each other. Recent UFO whistleblowers are also hinting that the non-human intelligences that are here do not like each other and have factionalized. We're also being told that our Western governments have some kind of relationship and agreement with non-human intelligences, and it has been hinted throughout the disclosure movement that our geopolitical adversaries may have relationships with other non-human intelligences, perhaps some of those other factions. Now add in the genetic component. Now add in the interbreeding. What do you get? Maybe it's not just that we're going to be told that some people on the planet have more or less non-human DNA, which would already be explosive. But what if different groups, different demographics, different geopolitical adversaries have different non-human DNA? What would it mean for someone to say that we shouldn't kill our fellow human beings when we're also simultaneously being told that some groups of people on Earth are in fact partially non-human? What does it mean to say that all human beings are equal when we're also told that some human beings have the genetic material from the good non-humans and some human beings have the genetic material of evil non-human intelligences? What does it mean to say that we shouldn't go to war and kill the population of another country when we're also told that they are allied and interbreeding with non-human intelligences who want to destroy us?
There are groups of humans working with this intelligence, and this would not be your typical Western democracy, that are working with these groups either by proximity to them or directly with them to fix something within their DNA to help them proliferate on this planet.
Once again, my goal here is not to convince you that these things are true, but to highlight quite how explosive the revelation of human alien hybrids might be, and the implications it may have for our geopolitics today. And I wonder if some of you are looking at the genocide which is happening in Palestine right now and asking yourselves, could this be related not simply to our own geopolitics, but potentially also to the politics of non-human intelligences? Here is a passage from Tom DeLonge and Peter Levender's book, Secret Machines, Volume 2, where they tell us exactly what they were told by one of their advisors. One of our informants suggested we look more closely at the role that genetics plays in the narratives associated with the phenomenon. He suggested that we entertain the possibility that acts of genocide in human history had an ulterior function, if not an ulterior motive. In other words, there were some human genetic characteristics that had evolved over time that were less amenable to the much-rumored alien hybrid scenarios that contactees have reported with consistency over the past few decades. We were asked to consider that some ethnicities might be carriers of specific genes that were resistant to alien manipulation, and that genocide was an alien-inspired or alien-directed program to weed out any potential problems, obstacles to alien control lurking in the human gene pool as it had evolved on our planet. Conversely, what if some of the genetic mutations that were weeded out of the human genome due to natural selection, i.e. in order to survive on Earth, may be necessary to enable us to live off-planet? At first, this sounds like warmed-over eugenics, the type of race science that justified the worst excesses of the Nazi regime. Perhaps it's not for nothing that some contactees report the existence of so-called Nordics. Looked at more closely, we can see that some races and ethnicities are carriers of genes specific to certain illnesses, such as sickle cell anemia among African Americans and Tay-Sachs disease among Jews. What if there was another gene or genes that have no particular function or pose no discernible threat as far as we are concerned, perhaps hidden within our so-called junk DNA, but that would be considered dangerous to an alien race? In other words, what if the human race or a certain ethnicity was evolving alien antibodies that would render us invulnerable to an alien hybridization program, or whatever else the others had in mind? What if we were developing intellectual or physical powers that would enable greater awareness of their presence, or provide us with some greater degree of protection against their intentions? When Levender refers to one of our informants, we are dealing with some of the most senior people from the defense and intelligence community who are directly connecting human genocides with the intentions of non-human intelligences. You are not crazy to look at what is happening in our geopolitics today and to ask the question whether or not there may indeed be some deeper reality at play, and that this potentially could explain why our world leaders seem completely unable to challenge the indefensible. And here in this quotation we see that people inside of the defense and intelligence community are hinting at the idea that a certain ethnicity might be developing unique genetic abilities which makes them more able to withstand the phenomenon. And as I say that out loud, I find myself simultaneously trying to imagine if this could be true, and also asking myself, could this all just be one enormous psyop designed to give favor to a unique ethnicity which claims to have superior genetics which will enable the human race to move forwards? I don't want to say anything more about that, because those of you who are wise enough to look at our world and to ask how non-human intelligence may be connected to what we're seeing around us can obviously piece the jigsaw pieces together. What I do want to do, though, is to add a couple more critical details to this huge narrative that will show you quite how precarious our situation may in fact be. When we think about the idea of non-human intelligences breeding with humans, I wonder if in your mind's eye you're seeing reptilians or tall whites, something that looks fundamentally different to us, but may in fact share some genetic material with us. But I'm assuming that many of you have also heard rumors that some non-human intelligences actually look just like us. And in fact, there are so many people who talk about this that it's almost impossible to avoid this theme.
Robert Bigelow said to me, "They're walking among us." I said, "What do you mean they're walking among us?" He said, they're walking among us. They live right here.
Different races are coming here, and they're trying to win and against each other.
So there's more than one race.
Yeah.
How many
this
different ones
universe we're talking about.
Right.
I don't know how many. I don't know.
But there's a bunch of different creatures, and they all have the same sort of technology.
Yeah, and some are very human. Some look just like you and I.
What happens when you not only have human beings who have non-human DNA, but you also have non-human intelligences who look identical to the human beings on this planet? What happens if we're trying to deal with those non-humans? What happens when the governments of the world tell us that although that group of people in that country look like human beings, they're in fact non-human intelligences who are here to harm us? This is like the Salem witch hunt on steroids. There is the possibility that if these ideas are revealed and disclosed to the public, whether or not they're true, that absolute chaos and carnage could ensue. People with bad motivations looking to divide the planet could easily weaponize such a concept in order to demonize entire races. And the sense of fear and panic would be so vast and so existential that it would make the post 9/11 era look like a walk in the park. You only have to look at a brief snapshot of our human history to understand how these ideas could be potentially devastating. If it's true that non-human intelligences have been breeding with humans, and that some human beings do have non-human DNA to a larger proportion than others, and that maybe some of those human beings have different non-human intelligence DNA in their genetic code, well, you can understand why the defense and intelligence community would be really cautious with revealing that information. But what if this idea, even if it is true, what if it is used to drive a geopolitical agenda? What if it is used as the ultimate justification for the undefensible? What if this single piece of information could be weaponized by those in power? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the truth is, but I do know that there is overwhelming evidence that the defense and intelligence community is preparing to tell us that some human beings are more naturally elevated in terms of their genetic profile than others. There is one final concept that we've got to add to the mix before we conclude, and that is the hierarchy of beings. Here is Diana Pasulka talking about Timothy Taylor in her new book, Encounters. When Tyler taught others about his research, he often presented his taxonomy of beings, which was his cosmological worldview. In this hierarchy of beings, God was placed at the top. After that were angels, then off-planet beings. Off-planet is the term Tyler used for extraterrestrials. Below that were certain factions within intelligence communities. Below this were ordinary people, and then animals. He also had a phrase that he used very often, which was connect the dots. When I asked him about the factions of people within intelligence communities to whom he referred, who in his estimation were higher on the cosmological hierarchy than regular human beings, he told me to connect the dots. For those of you who don't know, Tyler is a pseudonym which is being used there for Timothy Taylor, the individual I mentioned earlier. And Timothy Taylor is an individual to some extent shrouded in mystery, but whom there has been more information about recently. And one of the things that has been said by multiple people is the level of his clearances and access throughout the defense and intelligence community and even beyond into foreign governments and foreign institutions is profound, remarkable, and unprecedented. This is an individual who seems to know everybody and have access to everything. And he is sharing this idea of a taxonomy of beings which is obviously intended to be shared with the disclosure movement. Earlier on in the quotation I read you from Jack Vallee's journals, where he documents his conversation with Diana Pasulka, it's very clear that they were telling her what things she can reveal and which things she cannot. And here in this book, we have the revelation of a taxonomy of beings, which clearly is supposed to be being shared right now. And within that taxonomy of beings, what do we find? Well, we find that some human beings are more elevated than others in the cosmological hierarchy. This is literally coming from the inner workings of the Pentagon. The idea that some human beings are more elevated. And when Pasulka asks who those individuals are and why, he simply says, connect the dots. I wonder if you feel that we may have connected the dots in today's video. And perhaps you might be thinking to yourself, well, what does it matter that Timothy Taylor says this? This is just one person sharing an idea. Well, then let me read you one more passage from Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent. One day, I arrived at our group office to find Jim Lakatsky and a couple of others kicking around ideas for a chart that Jim had conceived. At the top was the word God. At the bottom was humans. In the middle was angels. Jim theorized that if the distance between humans and angels is large, was it not possible that other beings existed between the purely spiritual angels and the flesh and soul creatures known as humans? Was it possible an entire ecosystem of divine and semi-divine life forms existed in an invisible ecosystem? Once again, we see the same model being propagated here by Jim, who is Jim Lakatsky, and then being spread by an individual who is clearly part of a disclosure narrative, Lou Elizondo. What is it that these people want us to believe? And why is it that we're integrating our understanding of non-human intelligences into a religious framework? Why wouldn't we integrate the idea of religions into a framework of non-human intelligences? That might seem like semantics, but it's actually a profoundly important point. By taking the disclosure movement and forcing it within the context and language of Judeo-Christian religion, you're opening the doors for all sorts of confusion. And when you combine this with an idea that some human beings are higher on the cosmic hierarchy, and then you connect the dots with the story of human-alien hybrids and genetic material, you begin to get a deadly cocktail, which not only includes some of the dangerous ideas from our human history about genetic differentiation, but also integrates religious and spiritual concepts, specifically Judeo-Christian religious concepts. We are not renaming angels with a scientific term. We are taking the Judeo-Christian terminology of an evangelion, a messenger, an angel, and integrating that into modern ufology. Genetic experimentation, genocide, a religious taxonomy of beings. I think that we can connect the dots. And I think we can understand why people like Jacques Vallée may believe that disclosure, whatever that means, could hotwire the apocalypse. If you've watched all the way to the end, please do the things like, share, subscribe. I've also created a Patreon recently if anyone is interested in that. Of course, if you're not, that's absolutely fine. Just please do like, comment, and share the video. It really helps. And the comments especially just keep me going and keep me motivated. I want to say thank you to all the new subscribers who are here. I hope you really enjoyed this. And I guess all that's left to say is, my name is Jason Samosa. This has been Jason Samosa's Ufology Moments. And until next time, cheers.